You're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my first reflections class of 2019, Healing Practices for the Soul. This is a major class for me. I'm always excited about all my classes every year, but as I said in a video we did for all of you, I'm introducing a theology, a kind of a major project that it has been brewing in me for years, actually. So this is my first class to discuss what I think of now as bio-mystical ecology and how a time for a new theology. And that's actually how I want to begin this. But first, I always start all my workshops with a prayer, because I think of it as a way of all of us getting together energetically and in our souls. So I want you to just kind of sit with me as I read this to you. Lord, I sometimes feel the glistening field of my soul. I cannot see this interior castle, but I have finally found my way in. I would not have imagined that such delicate perceptions were possible, but it's true. The soul has eyes of its own, and every now and again when I'm quiet enough, or perhaps graced enough, I catch a glance of the world as my soul sees it, and I am in awe that there is a part of me that so easily recognizes that I am bound to all living creatures through life itself. I am in awe of the conscious community of trees, of animals, of flowers, of all of nature. It is an effort sometimes to contain that vision and boundless goodness in my heart. It is too vast and too big. And when I'm forced to return to my ordinary eyesight, I have to admit I am sometimes breathless with grief. There is no way to prove this truth. I cannot scream it out loud. I have no words to convince anybody that they are connected to every living being. But I now believe so much of our suffering comes from making choices that fear this very connection, that make us seek more so that we are separate from others, or to seek so that others have less, that make us think that we will survive while others do not. What fools we are for having such thoughts, what harm we often do to ourselves. We can never be whole while fearing other human beings. And yet, Lord, the illusions of life are very clever. Just when I think I've conquered one, I'm beset by another, and I must begin that journey back to my soul all over again. Hover over me, Lord, on this brief journey that is my life. I am content to learn what I can, to live the truths that I learn as best as I can, and to make grace-filled choices. I find that love is the best treatment for stress, and generosity of heart alleviates most of my worries. And now I'll leave you to take care of the rest. Amen. Okay, let's dive in. I want to start with an overview. I love to give you a great big huge overview of where I'm coming from, and I always start this with my classes because I want to test the fabric of your imagination. I like to stretch it. And I tell everyone in my classes to use the metaphor of a building. In fact, I'm going to draw it because here it is. This is what you're going to do. This is your base. Can you see this?
No.
Well, I've just drawn a building. Someday I'm going to have illustrations. Just imagine a building. And if you've been with me in my classes, you've seen me draw this illustration, but picture any building. And here's the thing, that in a building, the only way you travel is up and down the floors. A building, once it's built, is permanent. Excuse me. And I really had this experience one time, and it just was one of those game changers. I was visiting a friend in New York, and it was a hot day. It was a summer day in August. And New York sometimes in the summer can be so, hot and thick, and the noises were loud, and the taxis were screaming. And I got into this building and I got up to the top floor, and my friend lived on the top floor, and she had a small balcony, which is very coveted real estate in New York. And as we sat there, the whole world was different. And I could see the Hudson, and I could see this beautiful, the city looked completely beautiful. It wasn't loud and it wasn't crowded. It was a completely different place. And I thought, if I was talking to someone on the first floor, and I said, you live near the Hudson and you can see New Jersey and you could see the Empire State Building and you can see this or that. They could say to me, no, I don't live anywhere near a river, and I don't know where the Empire State Building is. And we could argue about the reality that both of us shared from the very same address. And that really became a kind of a vision that I worked with, because that's what's true about our lives. Depending on the view that we take of the reality we live in, we could go up to our 4th floor or our 5th floor, depending on how bold we want to see our life. And just like living in a high-rise, every time we move up a level, every single time, it costs more money, so to speak. It's more expensive. You have to work harder to earn the next level. But when you do, and you get up the same address you've always been living at, you see the world again completely different. You get up to the 6th floor, and all of a sudden you're not blocked by that building, or you're not blocked by that, and a whole new vista opens up in the very same address you've always been living in. So the higher you go in your own building, the better, the more clarity you have. But if you'll notice, the people in the lower level aren't interested in the beautiful views you have any more than you're interested in their views. And if you, it takes a lot of effort to earn that extra income, so to speak, symbolically, to get up to the next level. And when you start living at the higher level of your inner building, the views that you get of your life and how you understand the world around you becomes a language that is different than the language you speak on the first floor. It's a mixture of archetypes and metaphor and symbols, and because you're no longer using street language, because street language doesn't apply. It's not unlike when people have a profound experience. If you ask them to describe what is love like, people refer to poetry. They do metaphor. Well, it's like this, because the language of the street doesn't quite describe it. So in that same way, as I start to describe the places I want to take you in this particular series, oftentimes we're going to go up several floors to stretch the imagination, because there's concepts and thoughts that we'll be talking about that aren't discussed at street level of life. But that's what makes I think, learning things so exciting, actually. So we're going to begin by my introducing the idea that from my point of view, what is happening, I think, is that it's time for a new theology. That's a word very few people use, and it's not very often used in common parlance. But it's time for a very different understanding of the nature of God to come into our lives. And there's so much on this I could say. I could talk about it for the next 3 days on this alone. But I'll start by saying that I have observed for quite some time that there's so many changes that are happening in our world, beginning with the breakdown of all the traditional religions, and they're going through what I would call a collision of the gods. Now, if you're on the first floor, you can hear conversations like, well, isn't that just typical of this church, or isn't that typical of this religion? Or you will hear people criticize the organizations of, the organizations, any organization. But that's the caboose on the train. And you'll never understand anything if you're looking at it from the first floor of a building. You have to rise to a higher level in order to understand anything, including about your own life. As a comparison, imagine if someone was walking into a problem in your life and they didn't know you, and they saw you throwing something and screaming at the top of your lungs. And let's just say it happened to be the day that you reach a breaking point. And if they decided on that when they met you, and that was the whole of who you were, without understanding that maybe you'd been carrying the weight of 15 people on your back, that maybe in fact you were the most rational person ever, but on that particular day, the government was shut down for 40 days, and you couldn't find the money to buy food for your kids, that was your breaking point, that it wasn't in fact madness. You had a reason to be crazier than crazy. But if they looked only at your first floor, they would simply judge the action. And this is my point, that if we look at events happening on the earth by just the event, you'll never grasp the energies behind the events that are actually the engines of them. And that's where I want to take you, is what are the energies that are actually fueling the events that are happening around us and within us? And what has that to do with the need for us now to consider that maybe part of what's happening in our own evolution is that the consciousness that's emerging in us is a very different understanding of our own nature, of our own creative authority, of our own, in fact, relationship with the structure of life itself. And that in order to get to that relationship, in order to get to the heart and core of this relationship, of the core of our power, the way that we are, that religious mythologies have to come down, the way we have always thought we were designed has to shift, that we don't have 5 senses, we have numerous senses, that the way we thought creation operated is very different, that in fact its thought comes before form, that our relationship with nature is in fact very conscious, that there are numerous operating truths that we have never incorporated into our understanding of life, and that what's happening now is that those truths are in fact incarnating in as the functioning principles of life. And that these truths that are not precipitated by an anthropomorphic religion, but by a cosmic structure that is basically conscious law, that is transcendent of religions, but it rather is a collective conscious law that incorporates all of life, that this is a conscious living bio-spiritual ecological theology, that this is where we're going, that this is what's emerging now. And because this is what's emerging now, it necessitates that the old mythologies come down. It is like the end of one archetypal drama, and the next emerges. This is what I want to examine with you in this series. Why I think that, how I've come to that, and what it means for us to even consider that and then apply it to our lives. So, and what it means to examine the soul outside of a religious context, but as in fact, excuse me, the galactic size cosmic life battery that it actually is within you, that and to track it as this force that is in fact the part of you that is compelling you to ask these rich, profound questions about what is this purpose for my life? And what does it mean when you ask a question like that? How are you supposed to answer that question? We'll get to that. That's not for today, but that's coming. But when you do ask that, why? And how are you supposed to answer that? And we'll get to that. It's just so rich. It's so good. Okay. So, one of the signatures of this transition in this profound time, something I want to say is that I consider it an extraordinary privilege to be alive now, by the way, because we are living in this incredible time of transformation. And that's a word that we can toss around a lot, a time of transformation or whatever, but really, this is exactly that. We really are transforming from one type of species to another. And I deeply want to take that apart with you so that you get that this is actually really happening. That's not a casual word. This is actually a phenomenon that's happening. And whether or not people consciously participate in this, or they say, no, I don't want to go along with that, they have no choice. It's not unlike when discoverers realized that the world was round and not flat. And cartographers could have said, no, I'm not going along with that. I've invested all my ink in flat maps, and the world is going to stay flat so far as I'm concerned. Well, it was too bad, because the time had come for people to realize the world was round, and like it or not, that's where everybody was going. That's kind of like this moment, that whether or not a person wants to get on board this age of energy, it has arrived. So whether or not we like the fact that we've become a global community energetically through energy technology. That moment has arrived. Whether or not we can cope with the fact that that means we must proceed with becoming a global community for all sorts of reasons. That is a next step. For a lot of people, that is a hurdle, not a step. And it is a wall. And they want to put up a wall. No, we're not going there. But we are going there. Because that's what evolution demands. And there's no amount of walls or hurdles that is going to stop the force of evolution. It is time. And not only is it time, your own bio-spiritual, ecological immune system is moving in the direction of whole. So all of us are moving in that direction. It's the signature message of our age. To that extent, and with that in mind, when I look at the classic religions, it is apparent that their theologies cannot keep up and have been unable to keep up with the essential teachings of modernity. What the, shall we say, global human, the person who needs to be instructed in what it is to become a global human being, the type of theology when someone needs to understand a global ecology, a global community, the type of theology that one needs to have can no longer be sustained, is not coming from the traditional religions at their political level. And this is an important part of this whole evolution. It is coming from their mystical traditions, but not from their political religious. And that's one of the reasons. If this was a class on history and anthropology and social crises, we could go down why fundamentalism rises at moments like this. But this is all I want to say about it at that level, that this is the typical kind of response when rumblings of change happen like this. But it is a kind of a classic activity at the earth level. At the same time, it sets almost the classic groundwork for the transition to a very different order of consciousness. So before I proceed with the breakthrough point, I wanted to address a question that is essential. What is the soul? So to kind of give you a little passport with that word. That is a big question. What exactly is your soul? Because that is the issue that's a question that has been, you can imagine, debated questioned, examined for centuries and centuries and centuries. I personally think this. I think the soul's been the great jewel that's been hidden away. What makes a mystic? Let me put those two things together. Mystics are people like Francis of Assisi or Teresa of Avila or Padre Pio. These people, the Catholic mystics fascinate me because they've had these extreme experiences of God. They've had extreme experiences of the nature of God. And they've had extreme encounters of visions or apparitions or encounters with angels or bilocation where they would be two places at once, like Padre Pio. And also I think that's Indian saints have had that as well, so it's not unique to Catholicism. But these incredible mystical experiences, the thing about the Catholic Church is that the mystics were always people that the Catholic Church wanted to hide away. They always made life very difficult for them. And you would think, well, maybe not you, but I always thought, well, wow, I mean, if you've got a mystic, if you've got a saint, you ought to, cash in on it. They always do when they're dead, but not when they're alive. But, you would think, wow, it kind of proves everything that they say in their faith. But in fact, these incredible people intimidated the church, intimidated the politics of the church. People like Mother Teresa of India or Padre Pio most recently in Italy, they scared the heck out of the church. And the reason was because they are people who managed to get to the power of their soul. And it was so profound, not unlike the Indian saints, not unlike the saints of other traditions. It was so profound that there was nothing they could do politically. There was nothing they could do at the earth level that could possibly stop the power that those people had in their soul. There was absolutely nothing. They could put them, order them to stay in their convent or their monastery and never leave, and it did not contain the force of that soul. There are so many stories where the power of people just knowing they were in there drew people to those monasteries by the thousands and thousands and thousands. The point being that the soul, the power that's contained in the soul, is so mysterious and so phenomenal that it is not unlike the poets Rumi or the way Jesus described it. It is the mustard seed that could move the mountain. It is that mystical authority that has the power over matter. Now, I'm carrying on about all of this because we're living in this extraordinary time of transformation in which the world that is so familiar to the mystics, this profound power, has made its encounter with the world of science. The world of science and mysticism have met. And I know you're familiar with that in terms of quantum physics and the fact that the physicists are now talking about energy and the quantum level of life, but I need to position this in terms of its significance within, in the way, in a more mystical understanding of it. So I have to actually follow my notes these days because I've made so many, and if I don't, I'll go all over myself. Now, there's a point I want to make about the soul as well, that before I get to the significance of this moment in transition, a way that I want you to relate to your soul is that for the longest time, I think the soul has this association of being a religious object or something that kind of maybe goes on after we die or something like that. But actually, what I've learned through my work, particularly as a medical intuitive, and then eventually getting into my own mystical path and healing, is that it's the loudest part of your life. It is the loudest, most relentless part of your inner being. It is the part of you that is compulsive about making you restless to understand the reason why you are here. It is the part of you that craves to be significant, whereas your ego craves to be noticed. So I want to kind of discuss that for a moment. The soul in you craves, desires to matter, to really make a difference, to mean something to someone. The ego simply craves attention, craves acknowledgement, wants to be important for the sake of being important. But it's not the same thing as this deep desire to make a difference. The soul has this yearning to, well, does my life matter? Can I make a difference while I'm here? To somebody, to something. Will the world be a better place because I lived? The ego wants to be noticed and acknowledged just because it is. You see the difference? One is this deep passion of, surely I have some greater purpose than to be noticed. There's a difference.